Strategies of refusal of political authority have been argued for by political philosophers for centuries. The shapes these arguments take are varied and nuanced. In part, the variance is a result of disagreements of strategy or the specific political philosophy being advocated. In larger part, the differences reflect the passage of time and the corresponding shift in dominant political and economic systems. Etienne de la Boetie wrote in France in the 1500s. His observations and political focus were on tyrannies, which were prominent. While tyranny is still present, it is no longer the tyranny of individual figures of power, but the tyranny of capitalism and the capitalist state. The strategy necessary for true freedom and liberty for humans changed with the transition from feudalism to capitalism. The most effective strategies have changed more with the real subsumption of capitalism. Mario Tronti wrote about a refusal strategy in Italy in 1965, around the height of the Apparismo movement's activity. In the United States in 2022, capitalism has grown into a different beast. Applied to a current context, a new strategy of refusal must emerge to reflect the nuances of the form of capitalism we live under. Examination of historical ideas of revolutionary refusal may provide important insight into practical utilization of refusal in political strategy today. Analysis of the strengths, misunderstandings, and shortcomings of political texts on refusal can inform a current and effective strategy for socialist revolution. In the Discourse of Voluntary Servitude, Etienne de la Boetie argues for a strategy of nonviolent refusal of tyranny through carefully worded questions. His critique revolves around the absolute power of individual and exploitative men. Given that a tyrant alone could not force an entire people to his will, the enforcement of a tyrant's power depends upon the obedience of his subjects. The physical force used to control subjects is exerted by other subjects at the tyrant's command. Boetie concludes that there must exist some form of desire to obey to remain subjected. His assumption that the failure of thousands or millions of people to refuse the rule of a tyrant emerges from a love of servitude or inclination to obedience is misguided. People do love and long for their liberty and freedom. The lack of revolutionary action is instead the result of the lack of perspective and perhaps fear of change of individuals. The great battles for freedom Boetie describes occurred in contexts different from the contexts in which subjects exist under the rule of tyrants. In those famous Greek battles, the Greeks already knew the freedom they were fighting for. It was the same freedom they knew before the battles took place. They were not acting for the establishment of a new society, but for the preservation of the same society they had enjoyed previously. What's more, the Greeks were united in those battles. In the resistance of would-be conquerors, Greek soldiers acted as one. They were united in their cause and immersed in the camaraderie inspired by the horror of war. In existence under tyranny, the memory of any freer society formerly held fades and dissolves. Some are born under tyranny or are children when a tyrant takes power. They have no memory of a previous life at all. The conditions of tyranny separate the people. That separation rips the possibility of simply refusing a tyrant's rule from them. In that context, the refusal of a tyrant can be met with violent or even deadly force. The fear of death, imprisonment, or bodily harm leads to the suppression of desire to revolt. Separation limits the perception of a person to what they alone are capable of. An effective refusal of tyranny is not possible without united mass action. While Boetie's understanding of how people relate to their oppression and exploitation is mistaken, his call for revolutionary collective action is as pertinent now as it was in the 16th century. Mario Tronti's The Strategy of Refusal is much more recent, and Tronti's writing in the context of a workers' movement in the capitalist Italian state is more applicable to current movements against capitalism. He argues that workers must refuse the political control of capitalists by making demands which cannot be met under capitalism. Capitalism must be met with a refusal to build upon the foundation of what already exists. By virtue of capitalism's fundamental basis in their labor, workers have the power to destroy the state, take power, and suppress the capitalists. A new society can be built on a workers' revolution. The refusal of capital by the making of demands that capitalists cannot meet is a powerful and compelling idea. Workers cannot win the ultimate freedom they desire by asking for modifications which make life under capitalism a little bit better. A revolution is necessary to give workers power over what their labor produces and how it can be used. It's necessary to give them democratic control over their communities and their world. It's necessary to get the better world we deserve. The collective power we as workers wield is more than enough to take control and to make our previously unmeetable demands met. The major flaw in Tronti's The Strategy of Refusal when viewed from a modern standpoint is his undervaluing of demands of capitalists that are not revolutionary. Since the operaismo movement and similar 20th century workers' movements, the visibility and influence of Marxist and communist ideology has been greatly diminished. While any workers' movement must culminate in the refusal of capital and a revolution which destroys it, effective strategy in the working class's current relationship to capitalism and representative democracies requires an approach in which revolutionary communists join other workers in their demands of capital. Like in Bodhi's imagined society under tyranny, people under global capitalism are fractionated. The development of capitalism has drilled individualist ideology into us. Our perception of change is often limited to what we as individuals are capable of. Capitalism's long history has also left it ingrained in our lives. Alternatives often remain inconceivable. Some of us completely fail to see that capitalism is exploitative and harmful. Some of us see it clearly but believe it is impossible to overcome, that we are doomed. But in representative democracies like the United States, where the possibility of some amount of change is visible, even if only as legislative change, joining movements for reform is a crucial component of communist and socialist organizing. Most people are not thoroughly politically educated socialists. Most people will not be convinced by a plan of workers immediately taking control. But those people are capable of being met, educated, and convinced. Those people are making demands. They are demanding the enshrinement of abortion rights into law and fighting to unionize their workplaces. When socialists join mainstream movements for abortion rights, they are able to share a socialist vision of a world in which bodily autonomy cannot be stripped from us, with a huge audience that may never hear it otherwise. When socialists provide support to workers who are organizing their workplaces, they can bring additional attention to the mechanisms by which workers are exploited and the strategic importance of the formation of militant unions. In doing so, socialists prove that they are present, they care about these movements, and they are invested in the immediate conditions of the working class. They can shape the undirected energy and outrage that erupts around fronts like the overturning of Roe v. Wade into energy focused on a socialist future. The Portland chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America has had some of its most impactful successes in fighting for reproductive rights and unionized workplaces. Its reproductive rights protests and organizing with unionizing Starbucks workers have recruited huge amounts of people to DSA. They can bring those people into organizing towards the break with capitalism Tronti advocates. The study of strategies of refusal leads to not just the necessity of the taking of capitalists' power by workers, but the need for a long-term strategy and effective tactics to build a powerful international workers' movement which is able to destroy and replace global capitalism. The details of an ultimate revolutionary strategy remain undefined, but it is certain that revolution depends on the collective action of the masses. There are countless logistics to be discussed and debated, but they can be clarified and agreed upon. Many can be developed and inspired by reading communist and socialist texts like Tronti's and Boti's. And as long as humans are alive and willing to plan revolutionary strategies and work towards them, a better world will be possible. I wrote this essay as my final for my politics class, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, but my writing will get better, and my understanding of all of this will get better, and I think it's important to know that we can make our world better. And don't worry, I cleaned up my lipstick after this.